I'd like to call to order this committee the whole meeting of the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the council chambers this evening. Our first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member that you have a responsibility to do so, and you can do it now or when it arises on the agenda. None. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. So this evening we have one delegation, and it's Mr. Pat Jellison. He's director of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and he's going to talk to us about economic development. Welcome, Pat.
There we go. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for having me here and accepting my delegation request. My name is Patrick Jellison. I'm a director with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture represents 38,000 farms and farm families across Ontario. I'm a director for Zone 2, which is Grey and Bruce County, which boasts close to 3,000 members, and 1,400 of those right here in Bruce County. Anyway, I farm right down here on the 2nd of Saugeen at the very end where it turns into a side road, and we raise lambs there and grow cash crops there as well. Anyways, it's my pleasure to be here today, and I think leading up to the election here, there's a provincial election coming up, and I think we've all been hearing about it. And when it comes to provincial elections, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture does get involved. We don't pick sides, but we like to present our focuses, what we believe is important to us as farmers, to the candidates and to all the candidates and to all the parties leading up to elections, and we hope that there's action taken after the election's finished. So the OFA, we advocate on behalf of all those members. Our farm businesses need the support of a vibrant community to be sustainable. This is why in this election year, we are looking beyond the farm gate and proposing a new public policy for producing prosperity in Ontario. And that's to benefit all Ontarians, not just rural Ontario. Ontario is currently growing. The numbers show our economy moving ahead at a brisk pace, but the growth is unbalanced. High rates of growth in population and economic activity are happening in the GTA and other large urban areas. Rural and small town areas are seeing declines in population and output. As Dr. David Freshwater, he's a researcher and a prof at University of Kentucky, go Wildcats, said at an OFA annual meeting, if some regions are not performing at a high level, investing in raising performance can provide a higher rate of return to society than abandoning them. OFA is proposing we not abandon our rural communities. Rather, we are proposing Ontario pursue a policy of distributed economic development so all of Ontario can benefit from its potential. We see many challenges across our communities. As you can see here, services aren't available, infrastructure, property taxes rising, schools are closing no longer nearby, and some limited opportunities for youth. But we also see serious challenges in our urban centers caused by that unbalanced growth. OFA contends that Toronto is not keeping pace right now and cannot keep pace with the expected 400,000 new residents in the GTA in the next 10 years. We need a plan that benefits all of Ontarians. Our plan is to rebalance the growth in Ontario through distributing investments in infrastructure. For those who feed on data, here are the numbers. The direct positive economic impacts of public investment in infrastructure as produced for the Broadbent Institute by the Centre for Spatial Economics. GDP rises about $1.43 per dollar spending in the short term when you invest. 9.4 jobs are generated per $1 million spent. 44 cents for each dollar spent by the government is recovered in new tax revenue. So that's what we're looking at. We want people moving out here. We want them buying homes, living here. These are our taxpayers. Private investment rises by 34 cents per dollar short term and up to $1 long term. Real wages rise, providing a higher standard of living for all Canadians. And this new opportunity will benefit all Ontarians, not just those in rural communities. And that's important here. We're talking about everyone, not just rural, we're talking about urban as well. Everyone can benefit. Public investments in infrastructure pays dividends. and will help reshape our growth and our economy in a manageable way. Roads and bridges make the economy efficient and competitive. Access to broadband makes rural an attractive place to work, live, and invest. New jobs will be available to our 400,000 new Ontarians looking for a community to call home. I mentioned broadband, and I think even here in Port Elgin, we have pretty good broadband. You have pretty good speed. You can watch your Netflix if you need to. Honestly, we cannot out in rural Ontario, and if we can't do it affordably. The outside, you get outside of the small towns, even in the villages of the countryside, and it's expensive, and that slows growth, and it becomes prohibitive. So we're looking at a new home for Ontarians can be our rural towns and communities. OFA's recent research determined that the Greater Toronto and Hamilton areas, the GTHA, families interested in living elsewhere were stifled by the lack of job opportunities. Our current policies, at best, leave them with an expensive home ownership and commuting lifestyle. We propose creating opportunities to live and work in affordable communities across Ontario. We're going to go here. We do, however, offer a cautionary note when we're talking about, all these people moving to rural Ontario. Our support for economic development across rural Ontario does not come without concerns and conditions. Industrial and residential growth must respect strict land use rules so we do not devour our agricultural land. And I think seeing this community and having lived here for a long time, I see that this community does manage growth very smartly. And I know that we can tackle challenges like affordable housing in Toronto by offering jobs and a great place to live right here. As mentioned, our farm businesses depend on the support of our communities. Our children need our local schools, and families need local medical care, and our businesses need local service providers and suppliers. Supporting our local schools in Port Elgin here, the schools are bursting at the seams, and we can all see that. My kids go here. The schools in Paisley and Chesley and Tara need support. Without a school, it's kind of the chicken and egg dilemma when you look at a small village like Paisley or anywhere. Without one, you can't have the other. What comes first? You need that balanced support in our communities to see them grow, right? We need places for people to look at when they want to move out of the areas, urban areas, find affordable homes. They want to know that there's schools there. They want to know that there's health care available. Health care is another big issue, I know, in rural Ontario, and that needs supported. And when it is, we grow. And all of Ontarians benefit from this. So finally, everyone, OFA is expanding our perspective on the scope of public policy needed in Ontario to help us grow our farming businesses, while growing all of Ontario at the same time. Our call for distributed economic development will produce prosperity across Ontario while addressing our rural and urban challenges. It will benefit all of Ontario. We hope that we can count on your voice alongside our farm families in producing prosperity in Ontario. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions or comments for Pat? Start with Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Pat. Obviously, building infrastructure in rural Ontario is something that we're all pretty supportive of around here, I think. I guess I just clarify for me exactly what OFA is suggesting. Is the organization suggesting that the provincial government just spend more on infrastructure in general? I mean, you have both a rural and an urban focus on this, so I assume we're talking about spending more on infrastructure everywhere. Or I guess I just am not entirely grasping how it gets more people living in rural Ontario.
Yeah.
It's building roads and things like. I guess there might be more government or government-funded jobs. But how do we get more permanent people living in rural Ontario from the OFA plan?
From our plan, so the need we hear from the businesses that we know of, the farmers, the farm businesses all across Ontario, is that infrastructure is lacking. We hear it a lot. But when we know that farming isn't the only business in rural Ontario, so I know a lot of businesses would thrive with better infrastructure in terms of bridges and roads, of course, broadband, simple stuff like that, affordable energy. Port Elgin is blessed to have natural gas, and you understand the growth you're receiving as a result when you're compared to some of your competitors in the area. It's the same for all of rural Ontario. Simple stuff like that. We know the benefits of having affordable energy to heat and run our businesses. So that's one thing. And what we're proposing is by doing that, by spending money there, not necessarily in the urban areas, you're probably going to start solving issues like unaffordable housing, with affordable housing in areas like where we live. We know that it doesn't cost $1.5 million for the same home here as it does in the outside of Toronto. So we can help that. We can look at what these kinds of solutions as a solution to some of the issues in rural Ontario, in urban Ontario, affordable housing, congestion, the long commutes, and jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the gist is that you invest in things like broadband, like natural gas, the province does, and businesses grow and thrive in rural Ontario, and those businesses hire people from urban areas to come and live in rural Ontario. So that's the connection we're making here, right? I think I agree with that absolutely. Spend definitely things like natural gas in particular. We have a lot of projects in this area that are held up right now that need provincial funding and provincial support even more. Just support would be important, and so I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good thing to put forward as the election approaches. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dave Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Thanks, Pat, for coming out and of course, being the representative for Saugeen Township. I appreciate the fact that you're putting a spotlight on agriculture and the important part that it plays in our economies, both locally and provincially. You mentioned that you're putting together a series of issues for the upcoming election, provincial election. There's a number of hot-button issues that are bubbling to the surface this time around. I guess beer and liquor in the corner stores and marijuana dispensaries being a couple, but the one that comes to mind that has the most impact on infrastructure and our economy for everybody is the carbon tax, looming carbon tax. So we've got differing opinions, and different political stripes are taking different stances on it. What's the OFA's position on the application of a carbon tax? Because as we know, any monies that are raised through a carbon tax, anybody who's been in favor of that is going to go into infrastructure, and this is going to be it's a burden in one hand, but a key to growth, and the same kind of growth that you just talked about in your presentation. So let us know what the OFA has to say about that.
Thank you very much. I think many of the platforms and across, for the upcoming election do talk about a price on carbon, and the reality is there's going to be, right now there's a price on carbon. And there's two options. And right now in Ontario, we have the cap and trade system. That's what we have to work within. And the other option would be to abandon that and to latch on to the carbon tax system that the federal government has proposed as well. Ontario's is a cap and trade that's it's happening right now. It's very difficult to nail down the exact costs. And again, I'm talking about costs because as farmers, we all run businesses. So we need to know our costs. And what's this going to cost our business? It's very hard to tell. How does it benefit us? A cap and trade has an ability within it it could be beneficial to farmers. Farmers, through different tillage methods and management and best management practices, can do things like sequestering carbon through no-till practices. We should be rewarded for that. And currently we are not. So right now we see a cost. We don't know how much, but there's a cost. The other alternative being a carbon tax. We don't know the rules there yet, right? We haven't been told what they are. We can only go by some precedent that has been set across Canada. Provincially, we look at BC, for example. BC has a carbon tax, and there are exemptions when it comes to agriculture. And that would be dyed diesel, for example. We used fuel for our tractors that don't get charged the road tax for, because they're not for roads or for the land. And other places also use dyed diesel, but there's an exemption there, and there's that ability. So I look at that and I think, that's a good thing. A price on carbon putting a price on carbon, I understand, is to curb, behavior. Change behavior, get people maybe driving less, using less fuel, burning less carbon. We don't have that opportunity in farming. We already do as much as we can when it comes to saving money, I guess, doing things as best we can when it comes to running a business. We don't have the opportunity at all to use less fuel, to turn down the heat on our animals. It would be inhumane. We can't do that. So knowing that we can't change our behavior just by pricing carbon, I think agriculture deserves some consideration when it comes to creating whether it's a cap and trade system of offsets or carbon tax exemptions built within there. I hope that answers it.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Pat. I'm curious to expand upon the coalition of organizations concept. When in our municipality, of course, if we don't think we have enough ball diamonds, we end up with lobby groups standing where you are saying we should have more ball diamonds, and then we should form committees to discuss why we should have more ball diamonds, and then we should look for funding towards that. So are you suggesting now that we ought to be partnering with a local agricultural organization more than we're doing today to partner and position ourselves to say to the Ontario government, it's not good enough, we need more? Because if that's what it is, how are we going to get there? Because other than you being there a couple of times in my term here, I've heard really nothing else about how our community and agriculture are working together in a partnership. You do your thing, and people live in the communities in the urban environments. They have a lot of pressure and a lot of demands on us. But as Dave would say, there's no sidewalk and there's no street light out at his place, and I get that, and I think he gets that. So how are we going to move this from building a coalition to something more tangible that I can work with and I can understand?
Yeah, well, no, you're right. We are asking for cooperation from the municipalities and the wardens and academia and economic development officers. We know that, and we've shown here that when you invest in rural Ontario and you see growth, well, those are your taxpayers. People show up. People are here for jobs and they're working. They're contributing to the community, but you have more people. And then all of a sudden, you can start affording new ball diamonds and new pools and things like that, and upgrading what you already have and making it the best darn place in the world.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to direct a question to the CAO, and perhaps the answer isn't available yet, but just for a later sort of discussion. We just recently had an economic strategy presented to us, and one of the pillars of the plan had something to do with agricultural activity. I just was curious, we've heard a number of initiatives sort of starting to bubble up from that plan. Do you have a sense of how we're going to somehow reach out to the local agricultural community? Or is it a little premature for that yet? Or, how are we planning to make sure that, we're helping our local area, and in that way, potentially setting ourselves up to be more active on a wider scale? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. The Vice Deputy Mayor is correct. Our economic development strategy, which was recently received by Council, does speak to the importance of agriculture in our community. Mr. Gilson is invited to our EDAC committee on when he's able to join us. Our Manager of Strategic Initiatives recently attended a workshop, thinking group. In fact, it was hosted in the building here to help advance and start to build plan to support our agricultural community.
Thank you. And, just to add to that, I can tell you at the county, we've, all the years I've been there, we've tried a number of initiatives to support our local agriculture, whether it's local food or the Agriculture and Culinary Association. But just recently we went through a pretty dramatic change in restructuring where we picked three sectors to build some support in and hired a number of people. One was energy and tourism, and obviously agriculture was one, but we struggled always with how are you effective in helping local agriculture, because significant changes on the Chicago Board of Trade for commodities have a bigger impact than anything we can ever do here in Bruce County on farm practices and the success of farms. But they're going to go through an analysis, a tax analysis, of trying to identify some initiatives. You may be aware of it, Pat, but I know, I hope you're ready to participate, because we're really looking for some ideas to build some support for our agriculture.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. It's agriculture is a strong contributor to the GDP in Ontario. We're right up there with auto, contributing. Well, the agri-food industry in Ontario contributes about $64 billion in terms of GDP, real GDP to Ontario, and that's right there with the auto sector. But we are the most important because you can't eat a bumper. And we also know that direct agriculture, primary agriculture, contributes around $30 to $34 billion a year in terms of GDP. So, yeah, it's important. We also realize that we are a steady growth industry, and we need to maintain that. And to maintain that, we need to be steady with how we support the infrastructure around what we do. And I know it sounds simple, but broadband internet is unbelievably important in our industry, just in terms of keeping people trained on the farms. Ministry of Labor mandated training is all online, and one of our farms, you got to take people to the nearby church in the basement to get better reception than what we have at the farm. So it's affordable internet as well. It's also for the kids that attend school from rural areas. They need that affordable internet. So, yeah, no, appreciate that, Mike. And also there's going to be some talk from the agriculture community over the next few years about the increase in the land values, and in turn the increase in how much money we're paying in taxes. So I think we need to stay balanced, we need to stay steady, and then we can remain steady in our growth.
Well, thanks, Pat, and look forward to the Ag Day.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Have a good day. So the next item on our agenda then is a general government staff report, and it has to do with the Saugeen Shores turbine operation policy funding. And our CAO, David Smith, is going to present.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Attached, members of council will see the request from Mr. Schmalz, who spoke to it earlier this evening on behalf of STOP, for the town to assist in a potential court case challenge in the ministry and their position with the wind turbine. Mr. Schmalz wrote his request understanding that would be publicly disclosed, and as I mentioned, I read it earlier this evening. After receiving legal advice, staff feel it is appropriate to partially assist in the funding up to the limit council has already earmarked for this issue. And the council supports that an agreement would be struck with STOP's lawyers to ensure that money is spent in that regard.
Thank you, David. Then the recommendation is that Council authorize the remaining funds of the original $15,000 allocated to support Saugeen Shores turbine operation policy to be the town's contribution to STOP's proposed legal initiative. Comments, questions? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau. Oops, sorry. I'll get.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support our expressing our support for this potential legal action by STOP, looking at the question particularly of the limitations that have been put around the turbine in terms of its original operating license. So I think it's I think this is a valuable thing to look at, and I just, as I've said many times here before, I continue to get just on a daily basis people emailing me with issues related to the operation of this turbine in terms of disturbing their personal space and their ability to live comfortably in their homes. And I think any action that could place requirements on the turbine to operate in the way that all other turbines have to operate in Ontario, if there's any reasonable chance of success there, then it's something the municipality should support. I would prefer that council considered supporting the STOP's original request of $25,000, and I think given the amount of money that's been put out by the residents to date, I think it's reasonable for the municipality to support that request. And so at the appropriate moment, Mr. Mayor, I would move to amend the recommendation to support the full request from STOP.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and once again through you. I've read the submission here, and certainly I support all of the work that STOP has done. They've done a great deal of research, and certainly Mr. Schmaltz has led the charge on that, and I applaud him for that. We just recently passed a motion, I believe, last council meeting, requesting that the head of the investigations branch at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change come in and appear before us and put himself on the mic and on the podium and allow us to ask him some questions about the methodology and the reasons for the lengthy delays that we've all experienced and what been frustrated by with the noise emissions testing at the Unifor site. By committing this money here, would we be putting ourselves in a position where that individual from the ministry may not want to show up or may not be allowed to show up because we're going to be in a legal situation with them now? I'm not being a lawyer. It just occurred to me that if you're taking somebody to court, they're not likely to be open and honest at the podium with you as they would be if otherwise. So that's my only concern with this, and I will support it because I think we need to follow through with our commitment to STOP and to our residents. But are we getting a little bit ahead of where we should be? Should we not have the opportunity to speak to the head of the MOE right here so we can find out why it's taken so long, and if we don't get the right answers and we're not satisfied with a path forward, then we go ahead with an action like this? It would just seem to me a more appropriate way to do it. Any comments from CAO on that, perhaps, or the Mayor?
Well, one thing I can say, I mean, the motion that we passed requested, we don't have the subpoena powers like a judge, so he has no obligation, or we have no way of forcing him to come before this council for any reason. But I suspect, if you wanted those questions answered and you mailed them to him, you would probably get an answer. But he has agreed to come. Sorry. So there's some new information. He has agreed to come.
That's prior to us filing a judicial review.
Yeah, I think the judicial review was, again, I don't know. It may affect some thinking in the ministry itself, and somebody about him may have some input into whether he's to come here or not. I have no idea. It's just speculation, Dave.
It just occurs to me that maybe we should have him come and speak to us.
I agree.
Before the judicial review gets filed.
Well, if that's what you... Please, Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd be willing to second the Deputy Mayor's amendment. I'm just curious to know, though, the town providing some funding to another organization, STOP, we wouldn't be launching any kind of lawsuit. They would. Is that sort of how this would work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was just reading the Mayor a note. If Council decides that they want to fund the full amount, then I would highly recommend that we get a lawyer and legal advice. There's a significant difference between contributing to somebody else's lawsuit than us leading the lawsuit as the lead litigant. which I think maybe stops in intent now. I don't know that. But it would be something I would highly recommend council have your lawyer in and give you.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
There you go. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. If this motion is being placed on the floor, and it's good to hear that we have a seconder for the motion, and I was about to second it. I think it's I have a stack fairly thick now of complaints that have come in from neighboring residents about the health-related effects, pain and suffering that these residents continue to experience as a result of the windmill, the blades turning down in Sauget Beach Road, Gobles Grove area. So I applaud the work that Greg and has done on this, and others have done on this, particularly Greg Smalt. I think that whatever we can do, I think, to help, I think with this judicial review regarding the ministry's response, I think if we can, support that cause, I think that's something we should be doing. And I've heard what our CAO has had to say tonight as well. But I will be supportive if that motion makes it to the floor. Certainly will be supporting it. I think that, once and for all, I think we do need to test this thing. And this group of people, Greg and and others have contributed, I think, apparently up to, according to the numbers I've received recently, up to $150,000 in private monies to fight this whole windmill situation down the Gobles Grove area. So the CAW wind turbine. So I'll be supporting if it comes to the floor. I think it's something that this council needs to make a statement to the residents in that area that we're with you, and that we're going to stand beside you along the way and help financially.
Thank you. I'll get to Neil and then John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And stand with and beside is heartfelt. I get that. I just heard a warning thrown across the bow from the CAO. I'd like to discuss it some more. If we're going to take on a giant corporation with lots of legal and dollars, then we ought to be real sure we're not exposing this municipality to huge pushback risk. And I would really like to say, let's take a pause. Let's hear some legal about our risk relationship before let's use our brain to do that before we put brain and heart together and say it's the right thing to do. And I honestly want to do it, and I believe it's the right thing to do, but we're way into another league here, I think, and I respect the CAO giving us a warning, and I think that we should pursue that a little more.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I've heard two things. One, that the representative from the MO has agreed to come. Do we have a timeline on that?
I believe it's sometime in April.
Okay, and the second thing is, how long do you think it would take to come back?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would certainly check our lawyers' availability. They did review the initial proposal. They have spoken with the lawyers that have been referenced, so they are familiar with the approach. They've described it as novel. If they're available at our next council meeting, then we could arrange for that. Failing that, I suspect that the one after.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to follow up with what Councilman I spoke to, and in my submission when I spoke, I did say that based on information I was hearing from your CAO, that's important information, and it may not take a whole long time to get comments back. It's just something that can be tabled for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever the time frame is. So I think the information that our CAO tonight has shared is important, but I still believe that if it's favorable coming back from our town solicitors, that I 100% will be supporting this contribution.
Oh, just hang on. We're going to have one more. I think we're having lots, and we're going to Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
just a suggestion, Mr. Mayor. I would support deferral until recognizing that asking our lawyer for advice on these things is not cheap. And I mean, it's an expense to the municipality. So some direction from council to staff to engage the lawyer on this. I mean, to defer pending legal advice might be a way to do it, and that so that it's clear to staff that we are directing them to seek that legal advice and return as soon as they can. So I would make that motion.
So you would make that motion. I have a second to that. So that takes precedent. We'll take the question on the deferral. All in favor of the deferral pending legal opinion? Approved. That's carried. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a staff report for the use of multi-resource policy during election, and our clerk, Linda White, is going to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Municipal Elections Act requires municipalities, including its local boards, to establish rules and procedures with respect to the use of municipal resources during election campaign periods. The attached policy has been drafted for the purpose of providing a consistent approach and direction regarding the use of corporate resources. The policy will ensure that candidates and third-party advertisers do not use municipal resources for their campaign materials. So effective May the 1st, the current council members will not be able to use any municipal resources for election purposes. Candidates who are not currently serving on council and third-party advertisers are restricted from using municipal resources as soon as they file their nomination or registration form with the town. This policy ensures that the current council members, candidates, and third-party advertisers are accountable for using their own resources rather than those provided by the municipality.
Thank you, Linda. Then the recommendation is that council approves the use of corporate resources for election purposes policy. Questions, Councillor Matheson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our clerk. Could you please clarify for me what you're referring to, like what are municipal goods that may be used? Are you talking like websites or what?
Municipal resources is anything that the town has acquired using public funds. So it is IT support, website design, stationery, advertising, podcasts. It's the whole gamut, whatever we spend our corporate funding on.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Sherburne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked Linda a question about this over the weekend. I just wanted to ask it again on this question of Section 3.1.11 and campaigning at events hosted by the Chamber of Commerce or Saugeen Shores Tourism shall take place only with the permission of the event organizer. I remain a tad bit uncomfortable with that one because it's us regulating a third party, and I'm not sure we can even really enforce it effectively. I don't know how exactly we would enforce. How you would enforce, I guess, if somebody was campaigning at a Chamber of Commerce event, only the Chamber of Commerce could really decide whether or not they wanted to do that. It just seems odd for us to try to extend ourselves into the campaigning at events hosted by third parties. So could you just reassure me on that, maybe, Linda?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. So this is basically the section that is putting the candidates on notice that if they're going to attend an event that's hosted by the Chamber or the Tourism Office, they need to contact the Chamber or the Tourism Office first and receive permission before they go. Certainly the Chamber and the Tourism Office can create the policies that they need to effectively run their event without having campaigning interfere with their event. So we're not trying to regulate the Chamber or the Tourism Office. We're putting the candidates on notice that if they're going to go to a town event, which is the section above, they're not going to be permitted to campaign during the town event. If they're going to a chamber event, they need to ask permission first.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need a little more clarification. So we have members that are active participants in the business after hours, which is a chamber event. What is defined as campaigning? Going out and talking, or actively saying, I want you to vote? I'm kind of lost on what is active campaigning in this part, especially when we are members of the Chamber of Commerce and we do actively, many of us go to the business after hours to support our economic development committees and stuff like that.
In that example, it's up to the Chamber whether they allow it or not, right? So we're not saying it's not allowed. The town's not making that statement. It's up to the Chamber. And campaigning is trying to convince somebody to vote for you. So however you want to do that, whether you want to hand them a piece of paper, whether you want to talk to them, actively talk to them, that type of thing. Again, it's up to the chamber to make that decision whether they're going to allow it or not.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. The next item in the agenda is, again, a general government staff report, and it has to do with the provincial fair housing plan, and I believe our CAO is going to present.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this opportunity presented itself recently by the Ministry of Housing under the Fair Housing Plan. The town was invited to apply for this program, which will be oversubscribed because of our low vacancy rates in town. The goal of the rebate program is to incent developers to build purpose-built rental housing. So that's rental housing built specifically to be rentals, not to be condominiums or owned. With Council's permission, the county, who have the resources, will apply on our behalf and administer the program on our behalf. I want to be clear, though, the town sets the criteria completely to meet our goals. Currently, staff are working with our colleagues in Kincardine to develop what we hope will be very similar, if not the same, criteria. We currently do not have any of our own incentives, except in the commercial care for affordable housing. However, at our last meeting, Council did support the potential of a community improvement plan program that could support housing such as this in the future. Due to the timing of the application, staff may need to make decisions on the application prior to further Council approvals.
Thank you, David. So the recommendation is that Council direct staff to work with the county to participate in the funding provided, the provincially funded development charges rebate program, and the Council authorizes the County of Bruce to serve as the town's service manager and as program administrator, submit an expression of interest and required documents to fulfill the Ministry's housing submission requirements on behalf of the town of Saugeen Shores, and that due to the timing of the application process, Council delegate the authority to make decisions required for the application. Questions, comments? Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the CAO. My understanding of the program, reading through it over the past couple of days, is that developers who develop housing that meets the criteria for this low income or fair housing would be rebated the cost of their development fees. And is it so that the developer would pay those assuming that we're approved, the developer would pay the development fees and build them with no real assurances that they're going to get approved until after the building is done and it meets the criteria, or would there be some mechanism for the developer to know before they put shovel to ground that they're in the program and that they're going to pay out this money, but they're going to get it back at some later date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll try to answer. There's a couple of things in there. There would be the developers. The intent of the plan is so the developers would know prior to, and they would be approved as part of that. There are significant conditions that there is a rental unit. I believe it's 20 years. The town is not out of pocket at all for this. Just one other point of clarification. This isn't specific for low-income housing or affordable housing, just to increase the inventory of housing.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But David, it could be affordable housing as well. It's not exclusively not affordable housing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's absolutely right. There is no proviso that the maximum amount is 175% market, but there is no minimum amount.
Mr. Mayor, I get it, so that the service manager we're asking that it be the County of Bruce, and that there are two eligible, at this time, there are two eligible municipalities in the county, Kincardine and ourselves. And I had a discussion with CAO today about the possibility of knowing the rules of engagement, and that 95% of the applications would probably be the same for both of us, but that each one would attach an appendix of saying, maybe these are the municipal incentives that we're prepared to put forward if that be the case, and they'd be different than Kincardine, because the long and the short of this is a grant program, as I see it anyway. It's money being kicked back by the province. So if that's the case, can we have some kind of staff report in the future? Maybe it has to be in camera that says what those municipal incentives would look like or could look like that we would be competing with and against Kincardine ultimately for these provincial dollars.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd be hesitant to say we're competing against Kincardine. This program will be oversubscribed provincially, so there will be a competition, to use that term, across the province. As I mentioned to the councillor today, council did approve a CIP program. It takes time to develop one that's appropriate and fair and that we can afford. It's unlikely that we would have an incentive program developed. Well, it's relatively impossible for us to have an incentive program developed for this intake. Certainly, we can work towards, if there's subsequent intakes, that we would be more aligned with them.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just, I guess, maybe a bit of a technical question, Mr. Mayor. Do we require procedurally some changes either to our development charges bylaw to facilitate rebating development charges to certain identified types of development? I just wonder I know we set that up in the previous bylaw. Certain types of development had the opportunity for lower rates, but that's sort of more broad, than just, it's either residential or commercial or institutional or industrial. But I guess this can just be done with our existing bylaws in place, and you don't need to make any other changes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and as we understand the program better, it's my belief that we won't have to change our development charges bylaw because we're not out of pocket. It's not costing us anything. We're not removing anything from the development charges coming. The province will be paying on behalf. So for us, there's a zero net part of it. When we go through the CIP program, then we will need to make changes.
Okay, further questions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Oh, the next item is the Environmental Services and Transportation Staff Report, and it has to do with the contract extension for Aqua, and I believe our Director of Public Services is going to present. Amanda.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. As you all remember, in October we brought forward the extension proposal for 1 year for the Aqua contract instead of the 5 years because we were missing some information from the ministry to be able to bring that back towards council. So today we are bringing forward, or we're extending our commitment to Aqua and our extension of their contract to December 2019. This is because of the good working relationship that we have had over the last year with Aqua and the confidence that the town staff has in the Aqua operators in providing safe drinking water to our residents. Aqua continues to properly staff, train, and operate wastewater and water systems for the town of Saugeen Shores. Aqua and the town meet regularly to discuss and cooperate in the management of these systems. The Ministry of the Environment oversees the management and operation of these systems, which requires inspections and reporting. Outstanding reports from the Ministry in 2016 and 2017 were not available at the time of automatic renewal of the Aqua contract, and therefore staff had recommended the 1 year extension to give council more detailed knowledge about these inspections. So Aqua and myself have come together with the agreement that you see attached to your agenda, and we would like council to authorize the signing of that agreement.
Thank you, Amanda. So the recommendation is that council pass a bylaw authorizing an agreement with the Ontario Clean Water Agency to operate and maintain the water and wastewater facilities for the town of Saugeen Shores as described in the services agreement for the term of January the 1st, 2019 to December the 31st, 2019. Questions or comments? Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am going to reluctantly support this. I still believe there should be a 5 year agreement extension. I had around the table, I suppose, other council members have had good relationship with Aqua staff members as well. I made a call to an Aqua Aqua sent an email to an Aqua staff member on the weekend and on a Saturday, and had a response on Saturday evening via email. And that's one example. But there's some information here. I think all of council needs to be aware of is that there is some concern amongst the full-time employees at Aqua what the future holds. And I know that personally because I've spoke to staff. And you look at what Aqua's done over the last year or two, and there have been some issues. I understand that. In January 2016, Aqua went from 4 regions to 10 regions, designed to bring Aqua support services closer to our clients. Previously, the regional office for Saugeen Shores was Thunder Bay, and now our regional office is in Wasaga Beach. It's closer to home. I just think that we've got a full-time person right in the Southampton office now. In 2017, there were some positive operational changes. Creation of a safety and process and compliance manager. A successful candidate lives right here in Port Elgin and works at the Southampton plant. So they've done a lot of good stuff, and I appreciate Director of Public Works has complimented our working relationship with Aqua, and I just want to let all those employees know that we do appreciate the good work that they do in our community, Mr. Mayor. And I understand to a point the reasoning, but I will support the resolution, but I still have the opinion it should be a 5-year extension, but I respect staff's good work they've done with this. So, but hats off to Aqua staff.
Councillor Dave Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I echo the sentiments of Councillor Mayat across the room here. I too have opportunity on a fairly regular basis to interact with the Aqua staff and see their facility inside, and I too am impressed with the level of professionalism that they conduct themselves with, and I too would support a longer term contract, but I will support what has been proposed here today. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just add that just recently we were at the Ontario Good Roads, the Rural Ontario Municipal Association Conference in Toronto, and had the opportunity to speak to the President and CEO of Aqua. And when we had that discussion, Councillor Mayat and I were very clear with him that his greatest asset, but the best thing that company has going for them on the ground in Saugeen Shores are their employees. And we conveyed to him that he should treat them very well because they treat us very well. And so I agree that I just wanted to point that out, that's certainly something that I think we all agree with. And one other thing I was going to say, but now I've forgotten it, so I won't bother. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make a comment and then I'll make a statement. So my comment is I'm confused as to how other members of council are getting into buildings and interacting with staff. Now my statement. I truly believe what our director is telling us to be true. I truly believe that Aqua is doing everything that we ask for and should be afforded the work. Unfortunately, my requests for an inspection and a tour have been denied, and those go against the Act, and they are my responsibility on this board to be able to do so. Thank you.
Okay, any further comments? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, 20. That's carried. The next item on the agenda is a Planning and Development Staff Report, and it has to do with the Building Department staffing composition, and our Manager of Development, Bart Toby, will present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening, I'd like to do the report slightly out of order and start off with the information report farther along in the agenda, the 2017 Year-End Development Services Report. In 2017 was an active year in the Building Department When looking at the construction activity in 2017, we need to see where we were in 2016 or 15 to understand the jump in the number of building permits issued. And Saugeen Shores is growing. Saugeen Shores has seen a 22% increase in the volume of building permits issued in 2017 to 421 permits. Since 2015, the number of building permits issued in Saugeen Shores has increased by 45% during this period. New housing activity, new housing increased to 203 new residential units, split between 108 single detached and 95 semi-detached dwellings in 2017. In 2016, there were 152 new residential units created, split between 66 single detached and 31 semi-detached, and 54 apartment units. In 2015, there were 56 residential units created. Construction value increased by 74% to $76.7 million in 2017, up from $44 million in 2016 and $37.3 million in 2015. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Then the recommendation is that Council receives. Yes, this is the right one. Right? Yeah, Council receives the Hempson. No? Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
The second report, which is the staff department.
I apologize because you told me you were going to do that today in the office, and I forgot, Bart. I apologize for that.
That's okay. It's hard to get an information report in front of a staff report, so I had to kind of do it this way. Back to the original report. The building department staffing composition. Over the past 2 years, Saugeen Shores has seen a substantial increase in building permit activity. 39% more building permits issued since the start of 2016, and this activity is expected to continue. Due to the increase in permit activities, Hempson Consulting was retained to review the staffing levels and compare them with similar municipalities. In the table, the number of permits examined per employee, Saugeen Shores was above average. An additional employee will bring this number closer to average, but will still be above average using the 2017 stats and calculating the anticipated growth in 2018. In the table from the Hempson report, the construction value of permits per employee, Saugeen Shores had the highest value of comparators at $25.57 million per employee, while the average was $13.83 million. An additional employee will not change that figure substantially, as anticipated growth in 2018 is expected to continue. Our focus group and survey feedback indicate that developers and building permit applicants desire a quick turnaround time, and additional staff will support this. Thank you.
Thanks, Bart. The recommendation is that Council receives the Hempson Consulting Limited report and approve increasing the building department staff levels to 4 full-time members with the hiring of an additional inspector. Comments, questions? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, it seems, and thank you for the report, Bart, it seems abundantly apparent to me that we need to have some additional people in the building department. We probably have had that need for quite a while now, and in fact, there's been very few years in my memory where the building department has drawn on its reserves. Most years it's contributed, the vast majority of years it's contributed to its reserves, meaning to me that most of the time, we're operating sort of above, that our staff is working very hard and going above and beyond and getting a lot of work done. But we've reached a stage where we need more people, and I think that's really clear. Though one thing that concerns me about the Hempson report is something that I think may affect the future, and that is this question of the use of registered code agencies. I think that at some point, growth may continue to increase, and that we may need more help. And if that happens, the registered code agency may be an approach that we want to take. And thankfully, Hempson really hasn't provided any good reasons not to do that, though they tried, but there aren't any good ones. They said the one thing that a few things get me, but this concept that private sector firms being profit-oriented cannot operate effectively in the public interest is, it's insulting to private sector firms. I think in fact we could use a registered code agency in the future. I think that would be really a viable alternative. And this statement at the end of that section, for these reasons, the town does not intend to use RCAs into the future, sounds like a policy statement to me, and that I am concerned that receiving the report may begin to have an effect on policy going forward. If council says, yes, we receive what is in this report, and that starts to, statements like that by council start to have an impact on policies in the future. So I would like, Mr. Mayor, to see us, I would like consent from council to separate the questions. I'd like to vote separately on receiving the Hempson report and on improving the increase to the building department. I'd rather not receive the Hempson report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That it obligates it in the future to do some particular thing, or is likely to intend it to obligate it to do some particular thing? I don't, because if that's it, I don't agree with it.
I wouldn't say, Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't say that it obligates council to do something, but these things do, as council accepts reports or receives reports, it does have a tendency to steer municipal policy into the future. The administration acts on those reports once we've received them, and today maybe there's no intent to act on that, but there's a pretty strong statement in there that the municipality is not going to do that, and I say that that's something we don't need to say. And I see that there's no net effect to not receiving the report. Don't receive it, we still approve the staffing increase. I just don't, it doesn't negatively impact the intent here, but it does not make a statement that I'm not interested in seeing us make. It's a simple thing to separate the motion. If council supports it, it supports it. I'd rather vote against receiving the report.
So, a seconder to separate the motion. Okay. So then I'm going to ask the question. The first one is that council receives the Hempson consulting report. So, any discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? Are we sure what we did there? We're opposed. We didn't receive it. Okay. Yeah, I voted the wrong way. I appreciate that. I missed it. Wouldn't have mattered. Anyway, so the next then is that council approve the increasing the building department staff levels to 4 full-time members with the hiring of an initial inspector. Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification, in the financial impact comment, I'm just curious, there's the word reserves is used a couple of times. The reference to fleet expenses, do fleet costs for building department employees, are they within the building department budget, or is this fleet expense, is this an addition that would be added in based on the fleet reserve? So is this an extra vehicle cost that we weren't anticipating in the budget, or is this absorbed into the building department budget because of the way it's all set up?
The building department pays into fleet for the number of vehicles it presently uses. If there's an expectation that there's going to be an extra vehicle needed for an inspector, then the fleet will, then the reserve, the building stabilization reserve will pay into fleet reserve to cover that cost. Fleet won't be expected to pay for a cost that has not been contributed to over a period.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
So, and I should have asked this before I came to the meeting. So, what's the implications of a full-time employee versus like a contract employee? So, say for example, next year all building permits go down to 0. Now what? And, do you know what I mean? I'm not. I mean, yeah. So anyway, I'm just curious about that.
I think we deal with that at the time. You know, I mean, I think if all our building permits go to 0, we got a whole lot more problems than one extra employee. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, from time to time we do look at reorgs and reassigning people. So I think it would be addressed at that time. Maybe you want to speak to it, Bart?
At present, the reserve has more than a year's worth of budget money in. So if we didn't issue a permit, we could still pay our salaries for a year and then some before we came into a financial issue with the town.
Try this again. All in favor of that part of the recommendation? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is a staff report for a lease agreement renewal with the Chantry Center Board, and I believe our director. Oh, sorry. Okay. Next item is a staff report for Building Department Communications. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the start of the 2017, a survey was distributed to unique one-time customers. This, combined with the strategic plan, organizational review, and internal focus groups comments, had led staff proposing the following strategies in helping customers attain a building permit. The updated web page to plain language, creating a communication strategy framework, and creating plain language information sheets are what staff see as steps to providing a better understanding of the regulatory framework of the Ontario Building Code Compendium and applicable law.
Thank you, Bart. So the recommendation is that Council authorizes $9,000 to be used from the Building Department Stabilization Reserve to fund communications improvements. Questions, comments? All in favor? Carried. Now, I'm having a little trouble with this machine tonight. The next item on the agenda then is a lease agreement renewal with the Chantry Center Board, and I believe Jane's going to present our Director of Community Services.
Thank you. This evening, staff is looking for approval for a 5-year lease agreement with the Chantry Senior Centre. I remind Council this evening that the municipality does own the facility and we lease it to the centre. They've been in the building since 1998. There are a couple of changes or additions to the lease agreement for this evening, and the Chantry Senior Centre Board is looking at able to host events that require a special occasion permit as long as the event adheres to the municipal alcohol policy. We've also acknowledged the fact that their insurance, liability insurance, will be increasing from $2 million up to $5 million, and I have attached the agreements this evening for your information.
Thank you, Jane. The recommendation is that Council pass a bylaw to authorize a 5-year lease agreement with the Chantry Center Board for the Chantry Seniors Center. Questions, comments? All in favor? That's carried. Next item on the agenda is the Community Services Staff Report for the Beachside Cafe lease agreement renewal. And again, like Jane is going to present the report.
Staff has met a number of times with the proprietor of the Beachside Cafe into renewing a 5-year lease agreement with them. The town owns the property in which the existing building is situated, and the lease is for the land only. And over the years, we've certainly had a variety of operators own the business on that site. The attached agreement includes a plan for safety inspections to the facility, as well as ensuring the facility and outbuildings are compliant with the Ontario Building Code. It also references upgrading to the exterior aesthetics and the patron seating area. The agreement also allows for an economic adjustment increase annually, as well as garbage collection. And I've provided the lease agreement for your information for this evening.
Thank you, Jane. Then the recommendation is that Council pass a bylaw to authorize the execution of a lease agreement between the Town of Saugeen Shores and the operators of the Beachside Cafe for a 5-year term. Start down here, Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple questions and then a comment. I would just like a little bit of clarification on one aspect of the agreement. There's a comment in there that talks about the municipality has the right of first refusal to purchase the property. I think it means the structure rather than the property, because we own the property, the land. If the owner makes the decision to sell in the future, I'm just curious to know if we own the land, if the building gets sold, I don't believe there's any built into the situation that there's an automatic lease that goes along with the building, because we own the land. So I'm just curious to know what would be, why would we be interested in buying a building that technically, if they want to sell it, whoever buys it, they're not automatically guaranteed access to that land because it's leased land. So I'm just curious why that would be there, that we have the right of first refusal.
If at some point the agreement came up for renewal again and they chose not to renew with us, or chose not to renew, then we certainly would have first right of refusal for the space itself. It is identified in long-term range as potential additional parking area, so it is advisable that we do have that first right of refusal in the agreement.
Okay, and I don't begrudge anybody having an entrepreneurial spin. It is interesting, though, that we talk about a massive project at the beach that is multifaceted and a whole lot of money, and yet we don't really have the vision to imagine a different situation in terms of revenue generation. I realize that the lease talks about that they're supposed to operate a business for, I believe the figure is 16 weeks somewhere in here, which is basically 3 months from the long weekend in May to Labor Day. And when you do the math on it, the rental rate is about $530 a month. And I can appreciate that, a business is a business, and times are tough, but, certainly we're about to invest all of this money in the waterfront, and, it just seems to me that, we're not valuing the real estate that goes along with our other investments properly. And so I'm disappointed that we haven't yet had sort of a vision comment about all of the rental properties there with the sense that they do represent revenue, and when we invest in other infrastructure at the beach, they benefit from that. But yet, it's any downtown business in either Southampton or Port Elgin, any business period elsewhere in the community would probably really appreciate having a $530 rent payment each month. And here we are, potentially, it's upwards of almost $750,000 when you add in all the monies for all the different categories for the beach, the main beach washroom upgrade. It's $750,000, and yet, we're not yet really discussing any kind of potential opportunity to recoup some revenue from the asset that we have when we're investing incredibly in that asset. So I'm disappointed in that part. I appreciate that there's comments in here about getting out of the lease, with notice and all that kind of stuff. And I really hope that over the next couple of years there's a vision put in place that looks at the rental properties and suggests that maybe there's a better way to do this. And you made the point yourself that in the bigger picture, there's that particular site shows an enhancement of parking opportunities. Well, if we are thinking that that's coming, is a 5-year lease the best idea? Maybe 3 years is better. So I'm concerned about a lot of the language in here, but mostly with the fact that we're envisioning big investments, but we're not thinking about how we're going to pay for them, and we have an asset there that has value. Thank you.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having just perused the agreement, not word for word, but I went through it today, and I didn't see any reference, and I must say it's been a while since I've actually been in that facility. I think it's probably been years, but I did take a walk by there with my dog the other day, and I wasn't able to ascertain if there's patrons' washrooms included in that building. And are there?
Yes, there is.
They are. Okay, thank you. That's really what I was wondering about.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two things. One, with regard to the rental rate, it's important to just be real clear that all we're renting here is the land, not the building, right? So the rate is going to be lower than it would be for a normal, any business where a downtown business where you're renting a whole building from a landlord. So, it would be interesting to do, and I don't know if the department has done this, and maybe the director can comment on it, some sort of market survey of similar rental arrangements where where somebody's renting land that a building's on. It might be very difficult to find comparables, I don't know, but it would be interesting to do that market study at some point and look at them and just to see if we're in the right area so that when we do revisit these, we have a sense. That's just a comment. My question for the director is on the question of, you mentioned in your report that there's some requirements for aesthetic upgrades or changes on the exterior and the patron seating area, and I just wonder if you could just sort of describe for us what those might be.
Yes, certainly the existing outer structures, outer buildings are not compliant, so we've spoken with the tenants and they are aware that those need to be removed. They've also agreed to do some aesthetic improvements to the exterior seating area, improvements with garbage cans and picnic tables. We're cognizant of the fact that it is a short-term window of opportunity for their business in the summertime, and location is not the most ideal compared to some of the other ones at the down at the waterfront. So be cognizant of that and what they're financially viable, able to afford to enhance. Those were some realistic expectations that we negotiated with them. And if I may answer in the longer-term vision, there was a question in regards to that too. The longer-term vision was certainly to have a canteen as part of the beach house. First draft, you will recall that there was an allocation for a revenue-generating source in that. And through the process, we've certainly realized that it's going to be a two-phase process for the beach house washroom build, and the long-term capital forecast does show that second phase, which is a revenue-generating opportunity for the waterfront.
Any further questions? All in favor? Carried. So, the next item on the agenda is a communications petition for committee of the whole action, and there's a letter from Scott Butler for OGR policy and research on municipal class environmental assessment processes, and I take some direction from committee on this, but I'd recommend this is one issue that I think certainly needs to be looked at by the ministry. Some of the figures in here, and if you look at some of the timeline, some of the rationale for it is well founded. We study things to death before we can get anything done, and it takes forever to get approvals. And I think they make a good mention there about infrastructure funding is almost always given. You are given the money pending completion of the work on a particular date, and so it puts you in a peril losing that funding. So, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
I'll move the resolution.
Support. Councillor Madison. Any further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. So we have two items on the communications for the Committee of the Whole. One's Union Gas and the other's a letter from the Port Elgin Beachers Association announcing a new president. And one other information report about the 2017 year-end development services report. And then we're not normally let you off without speaking, but I think you're going to have to speak to this one because there's some really good news in this part. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll never place them out of order again.
Thank you. Then I'll take a motion to adjourn. Don and Deputy Mayor, all in favor? We'll adjourn for 10 minutes.